friends, I'm Jen and welcome to my reading life. Today I am back with part 4 of my Getting to Know Me, the Bookish edition series, and today I am here to talk to you about nonfiction books. So these are going to be some of my favorite nonfiction books, and I've broken these down into five categories just to kind of group them together. I've always been more of a fiction reader than a nonfiction reader, but over the past 10-15 years, I have figured out the types of nonfiction books that I really enjoy. I have found some that have made it onto my yearly favorites lists and then onto my all-time favorites lists, and I'm going to share a bunch of those with you today. Let's just dive right into the books. The first category of books that I'm going to talk about is memoirs. I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, but I have a specific sweet spot for memoirs, and that is particularly memoirs that are about a specific event or time in someone's life rather than a, say, overview of their entire life. I particularly like those because they feel very specific to me, and these specific events tend to have both highs and lows in them, and I just really enjoy that. I find them a little bit more lighthearted than memoirs that span a person's entire life. Okay, I think that's enough explanation as to what I like about memoirs. The first memoir I'm going to talk about is Summer at Tiffany by Marjorie Hart. This is a memoir that follows Marjorie in the summer of 1945 in New York City. She has just left college in Iowa, I believe, and she and a girlfriend moved to New York City and they're going to get summer jobs. I'm not sure if they've graduated from college or not, but regardless, they're looking for summer jobs. And they land coveted positions at Tiffany's as sort of shop floor girls, which was unheard of at the time. Normally Tiffany's only hired men to do that, and they sort of act as runners where a salesman needs something from the back and they have these purses that they carry and they run back and grab whatever jewelry or item that the customer wants to see, and they bring it back to the salesperson. And so they spend a lot of time standing around, but it's just about the two of them. It's about their friendships with other girls that they meet in New York City and where they live and sort of how they get by. And it's really lovely and fun. And I just love this. I thought it was utterly charming when I read it, and I have reread it since then. And this is definitely one of my favorites, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's very light. It is a great summer read. So if you want a memoir to read this summer, I highly recommend Summer at Tiffany. My next memoir is Operating Instructions, a journal of my son's first year by Anne Lamott. I love Anne Lamott's writing. She has written some books about writing. She's written some books about faith and religion, but this one is about her son. And I was gifted this not long after my own son was born. I think he was about a year or a year and a half when I read this book. And I would read it in bed at night and I would just cry tears of laughter. If you are a mom with a young child, I highly recommend this book. It feels so relevant and you will feel so seen and understood by all of the things that go on when you have a very small child on your hands. And it just made me feel like everything would be okay, that I wasn't alone. And I don't think you can ask for a better gift than that from a book when you're a new mom. I cannot recommend this enough. It is such a wonderful read. I think you can appreciate it even if you're not a mom, but definitely if you are a mom or a dad and you've had small children at any point in your life, you will relate. Next, we're gonna sort of flip the switch from a mom's perspective to that of a single woman, and that is Without Reservations by Alice Steinbach. This book is Alice's memoir of her travels in Paris. She goes to Oxford and to Milan, and it's just about what it's like to travel alone as a woman. And I believe, I'm not sure what year this takes place. I can't remember. I felt like maybe she did this during the 1990s, I want to say. And so this was before cell phones and social media and any of that to kind of help you along if you were doing something like this by yourself. And it's very introspective. She is a journalist and she definitely writes with a journalistic lens. And this was just such an enlightening read. In my review of this, I said it reminded me of sort of an older, wiser version of Eat, Pray, Love. It's better than that, I do believe. And while this may not be a memoir that's for everyone, I definitely think if you enjoy travelogues, that this one is one that is definitely worth seeking out. My next memoir, we are going to travel back to England during World War II, and that is Spam Tomorrow by Verily Anderson. And this, we follow just Verily's life during World War II. I'm going to read you the synopsis on the back because I think it explains it really well. From an impromptu wedding in the early days of World War II to a bout with German measles in a hospital reminiscent of a medieval torture chamber, to becoming the first casualty for overeager VADs, Verily Anderson's war gets off to a bumpy start, and it doesn't get easier. In this acclaimed memoir, we follow the inimitable Verily and her husband Donald through all the vicissitudes of war, including the unforgettable birth of Verily's first child in the midst of a German bombing raid. By turns hilarious, poignant, and harrowing, and sometimes all three at once, Spam Tomorrow presents a rollicking view of home front life from the perspective of one strong, courageous, and very funny participant. That's really all that needs to be said about this one. If you enjoy World War II novels, I think you'd really like this. It definitely reads like a novel almost, and I found it really interesting to get a home front perspective from a woman. I think you don't often get those. I mean, you're getting them a little bit more now, but this is a really fun one. I say fun, but it's a really good read. Obviously, not all of it is fun. It's very serious, but she has a very lighthearted, tongue-in-cheek kind of way of speaking and sharing her anecdotes, and I thoroughly enjoyed this, and it will be one that I reread. I just read this last year, and it was on my favorites list. Highly recommend. My next book is by an author that is much more well known for being very creepy and gothic, and I think you definitely need to give this book a try to see a completely different side to her, and that is Shirley Jackson's Life Among the Savages. This is her memoir about her life raising her young children, and she is witty and funny and self-deprecating, and I was so incredibly surprised by this book and absolutely loved it. There is a sequel to this one called Raising Demons, a title I love, and I cannot wait to read it. I'm going to get to it this year. Highly, highly recommend. There is not an ounce of the Shirley Jackson that you might think of from her other books. Do not go into this with any trepidations. It is very funny and very light and wonderful. Okay, my next two books that also fall into the memoir category, but are more like a series of books, not just one standalone book. While both of these series tackle specific things in the author's life, they also span a much longer time period, but it still has that same flavor that I look for when I find a memoir that is about something, a very specific event in someone's life. So the first are the All Creatures Great and Small series of books by James Herriot, and I adore these books. I first read them, I think, in high school. My mom had them on her shelf. She loved All Creatures Great and Small, the TV series from the 1970s and 80s, and I was looking for something to read, and she put them in my hands, and I devoured the entire series. He's so funny. He is so wonderful. You wouldn't think the life of a Yorkshire vet would be all that interesting, but it is amazingly so. He's an excellent writer. He writes about animals in such a wonderful way and just about life in general. And he describes the Dales with such wonder and fascination and love. He just adores where he lived, and it comes through in his writing. I have been rereading this entire series during the week after Christmas every year for the past 4 years now. I'm going into year 5 this year. So I've read All Creatures Great and Small, All Things Wise and Wonderful, All Things Bright and Beautiful, The Lord God Made Them All I read this past Christmas, and I'm going to read Every Living Thing this Christmas. I don't know what I'll do when I finish the last book this Christmas, but maybe I'll have to dip into some of James Herriot's other books. I do have a few more on my shelves that some I've read and a couple I haven't. So I think I can continue on with my love of James Herriot I don't know why I want to read him during the holiday season, but he's so comforting and the books are so easy, and sort of in that lull between Christmas and New Year's always feels like a wonderful time to read him. And last, but most certainly not least, I have to talk about Susan Branch. And this book, A Fine Romance, was the first book of hers that I read. My mom gifted this book to me a number of years ago, and then it sat on my shelf. I think I just was waiting for the perfect time to read it, and that was a couple of years ago, and I absolutely fell in love with Susan, with her writing, with her illustrations. She writes the most beautiful books. A Fine Romance is all about the first time she travels to England and with her husband Joe, and just about what they get up to there, and is interspersed with all kinds of lovely lists and recipes and notes and what music you should listen to if you're driving through the English countryside. And she just fills her books with so much wonderful tidbits for living your life with joy and grace and simplicity and just reveling in the wonders of the world. And she handwrites all of her books and does all of the paintings and drawings in them, and they are just wonderful. So that is her handwriting, and all of her books are done the same way. So A Fine Romance is actually the third book in a trilogy of memoirs by Susan Branch, and it doesn't really matter that much if you read them in any particular order. I read this one, and then I read Fairy Tale Girl, which is the first book in the series, and then I read Martha's Vineyard Isle of Dreams, which is the second one, and it didn't detract from my enjoyment of any of the books by having read them out of order, so don't feel that. And I can't recommend enough all of her other books as well. She has a number of lovely books that are a combination of sort of recipe books with, again, life tips and lists and anecdotes and quotes. And she is just a wonderful writer, a wonderful artist. I actually got to meet her 2 summers ago when her book Distilled Genius, which is a collection of quotations she's collected over the years, came out, and she came to a local bookstore and got to meet her and her husband, and they are just as lovely in person as they are in their books, and I cannot say enough good things. She is in my top 5 authors' books of all time. Love, love, love. Cannot recommend enough. Moving on to my second category of nonfiction books, and that is narrative nonfiction. These are books that I particularly enjoy listening to as audiobooks. For some reason, I really am able to just stay engaged in a narrative nonfiction story when it's read on audio, much more than I am if I try to pick up the physical book and read it. And not that I haven't enjoyed some of them that way, but I have definitely preferred over the recent years to listen to the majority of them on audiobook. The first book in this category that I want to talk about is The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. And the audiobook is read by Edward Herman, who is probably most well known, at least to me, as being Mr. Gilmore on the Gilmore Girls. And he was the perfect pick to read this story. He was just fantastic, and I was gripped. Even though this is a story where you already know the ending before the book starts, because it is about the University of Washington crew team in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, and how this underdog crew team came to win gold at the Olympics. And even knowing that they are going to be triumphant at the end, it was incredibly gripping to read their story. And you kind of get the backstory of how the team came together. You learn about each of the different individual crew team members. And it is just fascinating. I never thought I would be that interested in rowing of all things, but this story was unputdownable. It's fantastic. Even if you don't care a hoot about rowing, I highly recommend reading this one or listening to the audiobook at the very least. The next book, or actually I think the next author I want to talk about, and I think these books walk the line between memoir and narrative nonfiction, and that is the books by Bill Bryson. He has written a ton of different books, probably most famous for A Walk in the Woods, which is about when he walked the Appalachian Trail, part of the Appalachian Trail. And it is hilarious. It is laugh out loud, tears streaming down your face funny. And again, I listened to that one on audiobook, which I actually think might not be read by Bill Bryson, but whomever it was that read the audiobook did an excellent job. And I highly enjoyed it. I've also read, he's written a couple about his travels in England. He's written about going to Australia. He's written a book about Shakespeare. He's written a book about the English language. And I would recommend any of them. Whatever sounds interesting to you, Bill Bryson has put his own unique spin on it, and I think he is such a fun, light, engaging nonfiction author. Definitely recommend him as well. My next narrative nonfiction is one that reads like a thriller, and yet it's a completely true story, and that is Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup by John Carreyrou. And this is the story of Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, which, if you're not familiar with her or this story, I knew a little bit about it because it is local here in the California Bay Area. That is where she was based. She went to Stanford. She was obsessed with Steve Jobs, and she founded this company that was supposedly going to be able to test your blood, like a blood test with like one prick, one drop of blood, and they were going to be able to test your blood for all kinds of diseases and all kinds of different things. And the entire thing was a lie, basically. She bamboozled very wealthy, influential business people into investing in her company, and the whole thing was a sham, and John Carreyrou uncovered it all. I believe it started out that he wrote some articles and it was going to be a big expose, and then they ended up compiling it into a book. Then there was a podcast that came out. You will be riveted and your jaw will be on the ground about what this woman managed to get away with, because it is amazing. If you enjoy that kind of, I mean, it is a bit more intense than a lot of the other books that I have mentioned so far. But if that's something that you enjoy from time to time, I cannot recommend this one enough. It is gripping. The last book I'm going to talk about that is a narrative nonfiction is The Feather Thief, Beauty, Obsession, and the Natural History Heist of the Century by Kirk Wallace Johnson. This book is about a theft of feathers, yes, feathers, from the British Natural History Museum. And the feathers were used in the Victorian art of salmon fly tying, like flies for fishing. And I know that sounds like it would not be at all interesting. Again, this reads like a thriller. It's less intense than Bad Blood, I will say, but it is equally gripping. You just do not know what is going to happen in this story, and it is crazy how this theft occurred. Why would anyone commit this crime is really the big question. And that keeps you invested in this story because it seems so innocuous. Why would you steal feathers from the British Natural History Museum? It just doesn't seem plausible. And the characters, and I'm going to call them characters because these people involved in this story are larger than life and just such unique personalities, and I could not put this one down. It is so compulsively readable and, again, excellent on audio. My next category of nonfiction books are a couple of books that just didn't really fall into any particular category. I'm not big into self-help, but I like books that kind of help you to think about life in new ways, or talk about the little things in life that show you the small ways that life can bring lots of joy. And both of these books do that in very different ways. The first one is Gift from the Sea by Anne Morrow Lindbergh. I think probably most people are familiar with this, but this book is just about her meditations on youth and age, love and marriage, peace, solitude, and contentment as she set them down during a brief vacation by the sea. And I read this actually while I was on vacation, which was perfect, and I really need to reread it. I actually think I'm going to reread it this summer. It is so lovely and quiet and really makes you think introspectively about life and leaning into the simpler joys that life brings. I highly, highly recommend this. And then the second book in this category is miles away from Anne Morrow Lindbergh and yet not that far away from her, and that is Endangered Pleasures by Barbara Holland. The subtitle for this book is In Defense of Naps, Bacon, Martinis, Profanity, and Other Indulgences. And each chapter is broken down into a category of a thing about life, and then Barbara Holland discusses why you should enjoy those pleasures. I'll just give you a sampling of some of the chapter headings because I think it'll give you kind of an idea of what the book is like. So we have waking up, coffee, breakfast, working, not working, bare feet, buying things, saving money, happy hour, seasonal food, going out, staying in, bed, weekends, there's Christmas, there's bad words, gambling, disasters, crowds, being pregnant, growing up, getting older, books, relief, praise. It goes on and on and on. The chapters are very short. This is the kind of book you can just put on your bedside table and read a chapter every night and meditate a little bit on each of the things that she talks about and the pleasures that they can give you in life. And this is just a little gem, and I never see it talked about, so I just wanted to mention it here. My next category a little bit defies what I said earlier about the types of memoirs that I enjoy, and yet also kind of falls into that category. And these are going to be what I call my guilty pleasure nonfiction reads, and that is celebrity memoirs. I don't want just any celebrity memoir. I do really enjoy when a celebrity talks specifically either about their craft, about something about their life that is unique. I don't mind in this case if we get more of a history of the celebrity's life, so from their birth or childhood up through their career to where they are now. That I don't mind in these particular memoirs, but I really do enjoy it more if we get a lot of information about their, like I said, about their craft. And that is the piece that I enjoy the most, though I do like learning a little bit about them as human beings as well, because I think we can often put celebrities up on pedestals that they don't deserve, and it's really nice to see the human side behind the glossy magazine cover. The first book I'm going to talk about is Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton. And Tom Felton is best known for playing Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter movies. And Tom goes into all the behind the scenes stuff that you want to know if you are a Harry Potter fan. He dishes it all out for you, and it's really wonderful. He has a lot of nostalgia for the films and for the friends he made there and the people he met and the experiences he had as a result. He also does talk about how he has some substance abuse issues that came as a result of his celebrity, and he doesn't shy away from talking about that, though he does it with a very deft hand, and I appreciated that. And he's just very charming, and again, I highly recommend the audiobook, particularly for celebrity memoirs when they read it themselves, because hearing about their lives in their own voices is the best way to do that. The next celebrity memoir that I enjoyed recently was Managing Expectations by Minnie Driver. I actually listened to this on a road trip down to visit a friend, and it took me all the way there and back again, and I enjoyed spending time with Minnie Driver so much. I learned so much about her that I did not know before, and the audiobook actually has an interview between Minnie Driver and a friend of hers, and they go into the book a little bit more in depth, and you get to hear Minnie talk about the book itself and the making of the book and kind of how she did that, which is a really interesting addition. And I definitely recommend, again, listening to the audiobook and hearing her read her story in her own words. I have loved her ever since I saw her in Circle of Friends, and this book just made me like her even more. She seems very down to earth, and she's had a really interesting life. The next celebrity memoir, which I'm going to talk about, is, again, this is one that talks about something very specific, and this book got a lot of buzz when it came out, and it was completely well-founded, and that is Taste by Stanley Tucci. And again, Stanley Tucci is another actor that I have always enjoyed watching on screen, and reading his memoir was utterly delightful. Again, he reads the audiobook, and I highly recommend it. I learned so much about him that I did not know. And it's also fun to go through his life and these different episodes and how he relates it all to food and to his Italian childhood and upbringing, and how important food was to his family and how important it is to him now, and to passing that on to his family. And I just loved it. He seems like a really lovely person, and that's mostly what I want to hear when I'm reading a celebrity memoir, is that the person sort of lives up to my expectations that I had of them. So 2 more books that fall into the celebrity memoirs category. Well, actually, the next is 2 books by the same celebrity, and that is Home and Homework by Julie Andrews Edwards, the Julie Andrews. And the first book, Home, is about her childhood and her upbringing and how she sort of gets into acting and goes to Hollywood. And then Homework is more about her life as she is an adult, once she sort of becomes a celebrity, when she does Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music and those movies that she really became famous for. And her marriage to Blake Edwards plays a huge part in that book. So you just get to learn all about her. And again, she's very lovely. She seems like a wonderful person, though her life, especially as an adult, does feel a little bit chaotic, just how they live their lives. And I did have a little bit of a sense of like otherness from her when I was reading those parts, because it just feels like a lifestyle that I don't know anything about. But even so, that doesn't detract from the fact that I still think she's an amazing singer, a wonderful actress, and she does sound like a very interesting person. And then my last celebrity memoir is one that really got me into listening to celebrity memoirs on audio, and that was Stories I Only Tell My Friends by Rob Lowe. I grew up in the 80s. I grew up watching Rob Lowe in all those movies like The Outsiders and the Brat Pack movies and all of those things. And I liked him fine, and he's very good looking, and that was about all I knew about Rob Lowe. But this book is so fascinating. He goes into all the behind the scenes about his life and Hollywood, and one fascinating thing about him is that he can do some amazing celebrity impressions, which is, again, why I highly recommend the audiobook. He does an impression of Cary Grant that is spot on. It's just fantastic. So, celebrity memoirs, a little bit of a guilty pleasure for me in terms of reading, and I like very specific types of celebrity memoirs, and I think these are representative of the kinds that I do enjoy very much. All right, this is it, my last category of nonfiction books that I enjoy, and I could not do this video without talking about books about books. And the very first one we have to talk about, which I've talked about on my channel before already, is of course, 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen H. And I don't think this needs much of an introduction. This is all about her letters between her and the employees at Marks & Company booksellers on Charing Cross Road, where she asks that they find her books that she has difficulty tracking down in the US. And she develops a friendship with Frank Dole and the other employees at Marks & Co. And it is just an utter delight, as is all of Helen H's books. I have this one, I have The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street, Q's Legacy, I've read Apple of My Eye, I've read a couple others as well, but I don't own them, and I am enjoying rereading them because there is just something utterly charming about her writing and her stories, and who doesn't love books about books? Next up is Howard's End is on the Landing by Susan Hill. This is a year of reading from home. And I didn't know what to expect when I started this book, but I was completely charmed by it. Essentially, this book is about Susan Hill's journey through her own bookshelves to read the books that she has in her home rather than buying new books or checking books out from the library. And the book is written in such a way that it's not really a systematic, like this month I read these books and this month I read those books. She discovers a book, or she thinks about a book that she knows she owns, and she goes and tracks it down, and then she finds it amidst other books, and that gets her talking about those books or thinking about them, and she relates stories about those books that she finds. And so it's got a much more meandering feel to it, and I just loved going with her on this journey through her house and her books, and how she has them organized, and how she has books on the stairs and all over the place. And I just found it so wonderful. And I am currently reading the follow-up book to this, which is Jacob's Room is Full of Books, a year of reading. And that book actually goes month by month and talks about what she reads. And I have decided, because it does that I am going to read each chapter during the month of the year that it is set. So far I have read January and February, and I'm going to read the chapter on March this month. And it is really hard for me not to skip ahead because I am loving it so much. I just enjoy her writing a lot, and I just want to read more about books. And then my last favorite book about books is Dear Reader by Kathy Rensenbrink. And I don't remember where I first heard about this book. I'm sure it was probably on Bookstagram somewhere. And this book says, for as long as she can remember, Kathy Rensenbrink has lost and found herself in stories. Growing up, she was rarely seen without her nose in a book and read in secret long after lights out. When tragedy struck, books kept her afloat. Eventually, they lit the way to a new path, first as a bookseller and then as a writer. No matter what the future holds, reading will always help. This is a moving, funny, and joyous exploration of how books can change the course of your life, packed with recommendations from one reader to another. And yes, there are so many recommendations for books in this one, and I wrote down so many titles that I added to my TBR after reading this, and I know this is one I'm going to go back to. There is a little bit of loss in this, so just be aware. I know it mentioned that in the blurb, but really it's about the books, and I think you can read this without feeling like you'll get weighed down by that piece of it. So again, I thoroughly love this one, and it's such a beautiful book. Yeah, books about books. Okay, that is it. That was a lot. I do enjoy specific types of nonfiction, so I really shouldn't say that I'm not much of a nonfiction reader anymore. Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, please give it a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed and would like to see more bookish content from me. And I will be back with another video very soon. Bye.